I don't think this is a good idea, but I'm gonna do it anyways. If you're a fan of Pokemon, which if you're watching this, I'm guessing you are, you probably know all about the different typings. But if for some reason you don't, every Pokemon and every move they use has a type attached to it, sometimes multiple. These are the elemental properties that the creatures and the moves are associated with. You got a fish Pokemon, that's water. You've got a bird on fire, that's fire and flying type. You got a rock, I'll give you 3 guesses. There are some types you usually need in your party to get through a game of Pokemon, like a flying type to use the move Fly to travel to other places, or a water Pokemon to use the move Surf to, well, travel to other places. But almost everything else is totally up to the player. You want to load up your party with 5 Magikarp and a Scyther? Go for it. I'm not going to tell anyone. So I've decided today I'm going to rank all 18 of the main Pokemon typings out there, and this isn't like a which type is the best competitively type thing. This is purely just the ones that I like the most and the least. As someone who's never played competitively but has put hours upon hours into these games purely for fun, we all know that the best type is the one that you're thinking of right now. But just because it's the best doesn't make it my favorite, so definitely feel free to disagree with my ranking and let me know which type is your favorite. I feel like normal is going to be the best one to start with, so let's start with that. It's exactly what it sounds like, just normal typing. If we were a Pokemon, we'd be normal type. They're usually just like mammals. But as someone who did a monotype run of Emerald with all normal types, don't let the boring name discourage you from using these guys. These Pokemon are kind of like blank slates if you get the right ones. A lot of them can learn a lot of different moves. Also, they only really have one big weakness, which is the fighting type. So even though normal type can be kind of boring, there's some heavy hitters here too, like Snorlax and Wigglytuff. I think normal gets a bad reputation, but it also is just about as mid-tier as it gets, so I'd probably throw this one on C. Water. An absolute necessity in most Pokemon games. Some of my favorite Pokemon out there are water types, and I use the water starters a lot of the times too, especially if it's my first run through of a game. Sure, if you go up against a grass or electric type, there's a good chance you're going to get stomped, but I don't care, water types are cool. And usually they're the most reliable choice out of the 3 starters. And even though they're generally only great against like fire, rock, and ground, they're still pretty versatile. You know, you can teach most of them ice moves as well as a handful of other types too. I honestly like water type a lot. I think I'd probably put this one on S tier. Fire. Listen, okay, fire types are cool. I get it. But I think they can be kind of dispensable, and half of my runs I don't even use fire types because most of the advantages they have you can get somewhere else. Ice and Steel you can counter with fighting, Bug and Grass with flying, and since I almost always have a flying type, sometimes I'll just decide if I want a fighting or a fire type in this run and change them out based on how I'm feeling. But let's be real for a second, some of the coolest designed Pokemon are fire types, and it's always nice smoking the other team with a couple well-placed flamethrowers. I think fire goes on A for me. Grass. I think out of the 3 starter types, grass is probably the worst in my opinion. It's only effective against water, rock, and ground, and if you're up against a water type, all you need is an electric on your team and your water problem is pretty much solved. There's so many grass types though, especially in early games, that I usually have one on my team up until I find a decent electric Pokemon, and then into the PC it goes. Yeah, if you're playing Kanto, choosing Bulbasaur will get you the first 2 badges pretty easily, but after that there's really no need for one, at least in my personal opinion. I'm gonna say C tier. Electric. So I sort of mentioned this on the last section, but I almost always have an electric type on my team. They're usually fast and powerful and only have a couple of weaknesses, mainly ground. But you get an electric type with Magnet Rise and you're golden. It's like the better version of a grass type because not only is it super effective against water, but also against flying, which are 2 of the most common Pokemon that you're going to be coming across. I think electric is one of the most reliable typings and I'm putting it on S tier. Rock. There are some good rock types out there, but I'd rather take a ground type almost any day of the week. Rock type is kind of useless in my opinion. Pretty much any type advantage it has you can get somewhere else that's probably already in your party. Flying you can hit with electric, ice and bug with fire, and fire with water. But they're also weak to like 5 different typings: water, ground, grass, steel, and fighting. Sure, there's some tough and hardy rock types like Tyranitar, but you go up against a grass or a water type and you're probably cooked. Rock just always seemed sort of unnecessary to me, especially when ground is just a better option. So I'm going to throw that one on C tier. Ground. The cooler earth type. Ground types kick ass against so many other types. You got electric, fire, poison, steel, and even rock. Electric moves don't affect them at all, and the only ones that they don't really affect is a flying type, but they can almost always learn rock moves, so that's usually not a big issue to overcome. Ground types are sturdy and usually pretty heavy hitting, which make them a really valuable asset to your party. I'd say the only big downfall is they're usually a little slow, but I mean, that's what Quick Claws are for. Ground types are just solid all around. I don't think I'd put them on S tier, but they're definitely a go-to in pretty much every party that I use, so I'm going to throw them on A. Steel. I know steel types are probably one of the best when it comes to like actual competitive gameplay. You know, they have a lot of resistances, usually a really good defense, and a lot of people consider it the best typing. I don't really care about steel type. I've never been playing the game and thought like, oh damn, I need to find a steel Pokemon. And I've also never had a moment of, oh no, a steel type, since I almost always either have a fire or fighting type, which will usually smoke them. Maybe my life would be easier if I added a steel Pokemon to my parties, but I also don't care enough. This is B tier for me, and you can tell me in the comments how wrong I am. Ice. Another one that I just do not really care about. The only real advantage that ice types have over the others is their effectiveness on dragons. But I always have water types in my party, and most of them can learn whatever ice move you need to make a dragon a non-issue. Ice types are basically like glass cannons. Especially if you're up against a dragon type that knows flamethrower, you're screwed. You come across a fire, fighting, rock, or steel type, and you're probably not coming out on top. Ice type's going on D tier for me. Flying. Flying types are kind of boring, but one that is like absolutely necessary. Not only for being able to use the move Fly, but also a big advantage against fighting, grass, and bug types, which are all super common typings that you're going to come across. So even though they can be a bit boring, they're a need for my party basically every time, and they're always pretty fast and reliable. I'm going to say A tier. Psychic. I do not give a shit about Psychic types, and I'm not sorry. They were OP in Gen 1, but the second Dark types got added in, Psychics moved way down the totem pole. They're getting us what? Fighting and poison? You got a flying type and a ground type? No need for Psychic. Of course, I mean, there are some super strong ones out there like Mewtwo and Alakazam, but with a ghost or a dark type on your team, who really gives a shit? C tier. Ghost. There are some good ghost types out there, and they can be fun to throw in your party every now and then. You know, they can help cancel out Psychics and other ghost types, but so can any dark type moves, and you can usually put those on Pokemon that aren't just dark. Ghost is a type that I wish had more benefits, but they always seem kind of unnecessary to me, especially after Gen 2 when Dark is just all around better. Plus, Ghost moves have no effect on normal types, which is one of the biggest typings in the game. I kind of hate to do this, but I'm going to put Ghost on C as well. Dark. Out of the three, like, spiritual typings, Dark is superior. Super effective against both the other types, and the only real disadvantages are Fighting, Fairy, and Bug, which you can almost always counter with something else in your party. And like I said, sometimes the Pokemon doesn't even need to be Dark type to use the Dark moves. Throw Bite on a Feraligatr and you're set against most Ghost or Psychic Pokemon. I'd put Dark on B tier. Bug. As someone who recently did a monotype run of Emerald with all Bug types, fuck them. They're such a weird group of types that they're effective against like Grass, Dark, and Psychic, while being weak to basically everything else. Like, listen, okay, Scyther is a top 10 Pokemon for me, but being Bug type is probably the reason it's not top 5. You think I leave any Bug moves on my Scyther? Hell no. I know better than that. Bug type is D tier, for sure. Dragon. Dragon types look awesome, but I'm not a huge fan of them. It is kind of nice that they only really have like 3 disadvantages in Ice, Fairy, and Dragon types themselves. And that can definitely come in handy since those 3 types are some of the least common ones to come by, especially in the earlier generations. But the only type that they're super effective against is other dragon types. I will say though, they usually make up for that by being pretty strong attackers regardless of being super effective or not. And like I said, they usually look really cool. But also the way that they hand out the dragon typing kind of pisses me off. Like Coconut Tree, dragon. Dragon, not a dragon. That aside, I'd probably say A tier. Fairy. Okay, so I grew up on like Gen 1 through 3, and then kind of fell off until about Sword and Shield, so imagine my surprise when I go to punch a Clefairy and expect a one-hit KO only to do barely any damage. Why aren't you dead? Fairy type was introduced while I was basically on like a Pokemon vacation, so they confused me a bit when I got back into it, but I can definitely see the advantages to it. You know, they're good against fighting, dragon, and dark, which while they aren't super common in the earlier games, later on they usually come in pretty handy against the tougher trainers. Also, it finally made poison moves worth a damn. I don't usually use fairy types too often, but I like having a few fairy moves in my party just in case I need them. I'm gonna say B tier. Fighting. I'm kind of ashamed to say I really slept on fighting types when I was younger. I was always like, yeah, they look cool, but I don't want that. I've got flamethrower. And it took me way too long to realize exactly how handy they are, especially when half of the Pokemon you fight seem to be normal type, especially in the early routes. And when I play through any Gen 1 game, you bet your ass that if I don't pick Squirtle, I'm getting a Mankey right off Viridian City to take care of Brock. Fighting type comes in handy a lot more often than you'd think, not only against normal types, but also rock, dark, and if you don't have a fire type, they're effective against ice and steel too. Tell you what though, your opponent sends out a Pidgey, you best be switching out. I think this one's pretty underrated, and I'm gonna go A tier with it. And last, and maybe least, we've got Poison. I get the point of poison types, and sometimes they're fun to use to like chip away at really strong opponents, but outside of grass and fairy types, they really don't do a whole lot. Like yeah, you can poison a couple of other types and might knock off a few HP every round, but there's also plenty like rock, ground, and ghost that you can't even touch. This is another case of where I won't use like a full-blown poison type, but I'll probably try to get a few moves on some of my other party members. I think poison types are pretty low tier for me. I don't use them and don't think I'd ever really feel the need to. I think I'm gonna put them on C, but they're very close to being D tier for me. And there you have it, my ranking of all 18 Pokemon typings. And remember, this is all just my personal opinion as a pretty casual player, but I'm sure nobody's gonna be upset about this. Who would get upset over Pokemon? Anyways, thanks for watching.